My ex-husband showed up demanding to see his son after abandoning us 10 years ago. I looked him in the eye and said, "You don't have a child. The stress from your accusations made me lose the baby." His face went white. The silence stretched between us as Ezra processed what I'd just told him. We were standing in my mother's driveway, and I could see my stepfather watching from behind the curtains, ready to intervene if needed. Ezra's mouth opened and closed, like he was struggling to form words, his confident demeanor cracking for the first time since he'd stepped out of his car. "That's not possible," he finally whispered, his voice shaking. "You had a son. I saw the photos online. The red hair, just like yours." I could have laughed at his desperation if the situation weren't so pathetic. "You saw photos of Spencer, my current husband's son. I adopted him after I married Grant. The child you abandoned before he was even born? He never made it past the first trimester, thanks to the stress of your accusations and the divorce." What Ezra didn't understand was that he'd walked back into the life of someone who had spent the last decade building a completely different existence. 10 years ago, I was a vulnerable 25-year-old who believed love could overcome anything. Today, I was a 35-year-old project manager for a major consulting firm, earning $85,000 annually with a professional network spanning 3 states. I owned my home outright, had $67,000 in savings, and was married to Grant, who ran his own successful contracting business. But more importantly, Ezra had no idea that his reappearance had already triggered every protective instinct I'd developed since becoming Spencer's adoptive mother. My husband might not have been Spencer's biological father, but Grant had been there for scraped knees, soccer practices, and bedtime stories for the past 6 years. Spencer called him Dad and called me Mom, and that family bond was something I'd defend with everything I had. "I need to understand what happened," Ezra said, taking a step closer. "Cassie told me she lied. She admitted she made everything up about you and Sebastian. I came here to apologize, to make things right." The audacity was breathtaking. "Make things right? You mean after Cassie's manipulation cost you everything, now you want to make things right with me?" "She was going to marry someone else," Ezra continued, as if that explained everything. "It was only then that she confessed she'd been lying for years. She said she was jealous of what we had and wanted to break us up so she could have me back." I studied his face, noting the gray threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked older, worn down in a way that suggested the last decade hadn't been kind to him. Good. "So when Cassie's marriage fell through, she suddenly developed a conscience?" I asked. "How convenient for both of you." "It's not like that," Ezra protested. "I never stopped loving you. When I found out the truth, the first thing I wanted was to find you and our child and try to rebuild what we had." The neighbors were definitely watching now. Mrs. Henderson from next door had come out to check her mailbox for the 3rd time, and I could see curtains twitching up and down the street. Perfect. Let them see Ezra making a scene in broad daylight. "Ezra, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned from managing million-dollar project timelines. "There is no our child. There never was. You signed away all parental rights to a baby who died 3 months later from the stress of your abandonment. I moved across the country, started over, and built a life that doesn't include you." "But I have rights," he insisted, his voice rising. "I'm the biological father. Courts recognize that." This was where 10 years of professional development in crisis management became invaluable. I'd handled aggressive clients, unrealistic deadlines, and complex stakeholder negotiations. One desperate ex-husband was nothing compared to convincing a board of directors to approve a $3.2 million budget revision. "Rights to what exactly?" I asked calmly. "Spencer isn't your biological son. I have the adoption papers, the DNA tests, and the medical records proving everything I've told you. You have no legal standing whatsoever." Ezra's face flushed red. "You're lying," People don't just move across the country and adopt random children. That boy is mine." "That boy," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "has a father who coached his little league team to the championship last year. He has a father who taught him to ride a bike, helped him build a treehouse, and reads him bedtime stories every night. He has a father who never once questioned whether he belonged in our family. You are not that father." The front door opened, and my mother stepped out, followed by my stepfather Robert. They'd clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "Is there a problem here?" Robert asked, his presence adding weight to the situation. At 6'2", and still built like the construction foreman he'd been for 30 years, Robert had a way of making problematic people reconsider their choices. Ezra looked between the three of us, clearly realizing he was outnumbered. "This is a private family matter," he said weakly. "No," I corrected. "This is harassment. You tracked me across the country based on a delusion, showed up at my mother's house uninvited, and are now refusing to leave when asked. That's not a family matter. That's stalking." I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. "I'm documenting this interaction, Ezra. Every word you've said, every refusal to leave when asked. My husband Grant knows you're here, and so does my lawyer." That last part wasn't technically true yet, but it would be within the hour. One of the benefits of working in corporate consulting was maintaining relationships with excellent legal professionals. My colleague Rachel had referred me to her divorce attorney when Grant and I were dealing with some custody paperwork for Spencer, and I'd kept his card. Ezra's confidence finally cracked completely. "I just want to see my son," he said, his voice breaking. "I lost 10 years. I can't lose any more time." "You lost those years because you chose to believe lies over your wife's word," I replied. "You chose to sign away parental rights rather than take a simple paternity test that would have proven the truth. You chose to walk away from your family based on the manipulations of your ex-girlfriend. Those were your choices, Ezra. You don't get to show up a decade later and demand we fix the consequences." My mother stepped forward, her teacher voice cutting through the tension. "Young man, I think it's time for you to leave. This conversation is clearly over." Ezra looked at all of us, his face cycling through anger, desperation, and finally defeat. "This isn't over," he muttered, but there was no real threat in it. He sounded more like a child having a tantrum than a man making a promise. "Yes, it is," I said firmly, "because if I see you near my family again, if you contact us through social media, if you show up at my son's school or my husband's workplace, I'll have you arrested for stalking and harassment. I have a successful career now, Ezra. I have resources, professional connections, and the legal knowledge to make your life very complicated very quickly." I watched him process that information, seeing him realize for the first time that I wasn't the same isolated, dependent woman he'd abandoned. The corporate consulting world had taught me how to project authority, how to make strategic threats that carried real weight, and how to protect what mattered most. "Go home," I continued. "Go back to Cassie, since that's apparently what this was all about anyway. Build whatever life makes you happy, but leave my family alone." Ezra walked back to his car without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he drove away, I realized I was shaking, but not from fear or sadness. I was shaking from rage, from the sheer audacity of his assumptions and demands. "Are you all right, honey?" my mother asked, putting her arm around my shoulders. "I'm fine," I said, meaning it, "but I need to make some phone calls." The first call was to Grant, who listened to my recap with growing anger. "That bastard showed up where?" he asked when I finished. "Lisa, I'm coming over there right now." "No, stay with Spencer," I told him. "He's at baseball practice, right? I don't want him coming home to find strangers in the house asking questions. I'll handle this." The second call was to attorney David Fletcher, who took my call immediately when I mentioned it was an emergency involving potential stalking and harassment. Document everything, he advised after I explained the situation. Every contact attempt, every social media interaction, every time you spot his car near your home or workplace. If he escalates this, we'll need a paper trail for a restraining order. The third call was to my sister-in-law, Jennifer, who worked in school administration. I needed Spencer's school to understand that under no circumstances should my son be released to anyone other than Grant, myself, or the emergency contacts we'd already provided. Consider it done, Jennifer promised. I'll send an email to the office staff tonight and follow up with a phone call tomorrow morning. If anyone claiming to be Spencer's biological father shows up, they'll call you and the police simultaneously. By evening, I'd built a comprehensive defense strategy. Documentation systems were in place, legal resources were activated, and Spencer's school had been alerted. Most importantly, Grant and I had decided to tell Spencer a simplified version of what was happening. Hey, someone who used to know Mommy before I met Daddy might try to talk to you, I explained to my 9-year-old son as we sat on his bed. If any adult you don't know tries to talk to you at school or anywhere else, you walk away immediately and find a teacher or another trusted adult. Spencer, with the practical mindset of a child who'd been raised by 2 parents in demanding careers, nodded seriously. Is this person dangerous? Not dangerous, Grant answered, but confused about our family. Some adults don't understand that families are made by love and choice, not just biology. Like how you adopted me and became my real dad? Spencer asked. Exactly like that, I confirmed, my heart swelling with pride at how easily he understood. This was what real family looked like, not the manipulation and drama Ezra brought, but the simple, strong bonds built through years of daily love and commitment. Over the next few days, I thought Ezra might actually respect the boundaries we'd established. There were no more social media contact attempts, no phone calls, no unexpected appearances. I started to relax, thinking maybe the reality check had finally gotten through to him. I should have known better. The first sign of escalation came when Jennifer called me at work. Lisa, we had an incident at Spencer's school this morning. A man matching the description you gave us tried to sign Spencer out, claiming there was a family emergency. My blood ran cold. What happened? The office staff followed protocol perfectly. They told him they needed to verify with you first, and when he couldn't provide the password we'd established, they refused to release Spencer. The man left quickly after that, but not before the security cameras got a clear shot of his face. Did he approach Spencer directly? No, he never made it past the office, but Lisa, there's more. He knew things, your mother's name, the fact that you visit her on Saturdays. He's clearly been doing research. This was exactly what David Fletcher had warned me about. Escalation from simple contact attempts to active interference with my family's daily life. I immediately called in sick for the rest of the day and drove to Spencer's school to speak with the principal directly. We're treating this as a serious security concern, Principal Watson assured me. I've already spoken with our resource officer and we're implementing additional protocols for Spencer specifically. The resource officer, Officer Richards, was a 20-year veteran who dealt with custody disputes and parental abductions before. The concerning part is his knowledge of your family's routines, he explained. That suggests surveillance, which crosses the line from unwanted contact into stalking behavior. What are my options? I asked. Document everything, file a police report, and start the process for a restraining order. The school incident gives us concrete evidence of unwanted contact involving a minor, which strengthens your case significantly. That afternoon, Grant and I sat in David Fletcher's office, formally initiating legal action against Ezra. The retainer was $2,500, money well spent to protect our family's security. Based on what you've described, David explained, we have grounds for a restraining order that would prohibit him from contacting any of you, approaching your home or workplace, and coming within 500 feet of Spencer's school. How long does that process take? Grant asked. We can file for a temporary restraining order immediately, which would be in effect within 24 to 48 hours. The permanent order requires a court hearing, which typically happens within 2 weeks. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt a grim satisfaction. Ezra had clearly expected to walk back into my life and find the same vulnerable woman he'd abandoned. Instead, he'd encountered someone with the resources and professional network to fight back strategically. The temporary restraining order was served on Ezra 2 days later. I knew this because he violated it within hours of receiving it. Grant was working late at a job site when my phone rang at... The caller ID showed my mother's number, but when I answered, I heard my mother's voice in the background saying, "I'm calling the police right now." "Lisa." It was Robert's voice. "Ezra's back. He's in the driveway, demanding to see Spencer. Your mother's on with 911. "I'm 15 minutes away," I said, already grabbing my keys. "Don't engage with him. Let the police handle it." "He's already engaged," Robert replied grimly. "He's shouting about his rights and demanding we bring Spencer outside. The boy's scared, Lisa." The fury that swept through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Spencer was supposed to feel safe at his grandmother's house. This was where he went for cookies and bedtime stories, not to cower while my delusional ex-husband screamed about imaginary parental rights. When I arrived, the police were already there. 2 patrol cars, their lights painting the entire neighborhood in red and blue, and Ezra in handcuffs in the back of one of them. He was shouting something through the window, but I couldn't make out the words. "Ma'am, are you Lisa Mitchell?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, and this man is violating a restraining order that was served this morning." "We're aware. He'll be charged with violation of a protective order, trespassing, and disturbing the peace. The restraining order violation alone carries a potential sentence of up to 1 year in jail." Through it all, Spencer had been safely inside with my mother, but when I went to check on him, I could see the impact of Ezra's behavior. My normally confident, outgoing son was shaken, clinging to me in a way he hadn't since he was much younger. "I don't understand why that man was yelling about me," he said quietly. "He's confused, baby," I explained. "Some adults have problems that make them think things that aren't true, but the police took him away, and he's not allowed to come near us anymore." "Will he come back?" "Yeah." "No," Grant said firmly, having arrived just as the police cars were leaving. "He won't be back. Mommy and I are going to make sure of that." That night, as we tucked Spencer into his own bed in his own house, surrounded by the family photos and soccer trophies and art projects that made up his real life, I made a decision. Ezra's harassment wasn't just about me anymore. He'd frightened my child, disrupted our family's sense of security, and violated court orders designed to protect us. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. The next morning, I called in another favor from my professional network. My former colleague Marcus had transitioned from corporate consulting to private investigation 2 years earlier, specializing in corporate security and background investigations. "I need everything you can find on someone," I told him. "Employment, financial records, criminal history, current living situation, everything." "How detailed are we talking?" "Yinhua. Detailed enough to understand how to make his life as complicated as he's made mine." Marcus's report arrived 3 days later, and it painted a picture of a man whose life had fallen apart in the decades since our divorce. Ezra had been fired from his father's engineering firm after 6 months, apparently. Nepotism could only carry someone so far when they lacked actual competence. He'd gone through a series of increasingly lower-paying jobs before settling into a customer service role at a call center that paid $31,000 annually. More interesting was his living situation. He rented a studio apartment in a complex known for accepting tenants with poor credit, and his lease was month to month, suggesting financial instability. His car was 7 years old with a loan balance that exceeded its value. Most importantly, he'd taken unpaid leave from his job to make his cross-country trip to find me. unpaid leave he couldn't afford. The interesting part, Marcus explained when he called to discuss his findings, is that his recent behavior is part of a pattern. He's had 2 workplace harassment complaints in the last 3 years, both involving female co-workers who rejected his romantic advances. Documented complaints? One resulted in a formal reprimand, the other in mandatory counseling. The pattern is escalation when he doesn't get what he wants, followed by victim blaming and attempts to manipulate situations to his advantage. This information transformed our legal strategy. Instead of simply defending against Ezra's harassment, we could demonstrate a pattern of behavior that made him a legitimate threat to public safety. David Fletcher was particularly interested in the workplace harassment history. This establishes pattern and precedent, he explained. It's not just an emotional reaction to your divorce, it's a behavioral pattern of not accepting rejection and escalating when he doesn't get his way. What does that mean for Spencer's safety? It means we can argue for a more comprehensive restraining order and potentially involve Child Protective Services in documenting the threat to Spencer's well-being. The permanent restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Ezra had been released on bail after his arrest, but with strict conditions including no contact with our family and no travel within 50 miles of our city. On Monday night, he violated those conditions again. Grant was at a school board meeting. He'd been elected to serve our district the previous year when our home security system chimed with a motion alert at. The cameras showed a figure moving around our backyard, trying to peer through windows. I called 911 first, then Grant, then David Fletcher's emergency line. Spencer was already asleep, and I briefly debated waking him to move him to the bathroom, which had no exterior windows. The police response was swift and professional. Ezra was arrested in our backyard carrying a notebook containing what appeared to be surveillance notes about our family's daily routines. He documented Grant's work schedule, Spencer's school and baseball team schedules, and my mother's address, along with detailed observations about our pattern of lies and his right to reclaim his son. This moves us into felony stalking territory, Officer Richards explained when he arrived as part of the response team. The notebook contents, combined with his previous violations, suggest premeditation and potential planning for abduction. Abduction? The word hit me like a physical blow. "Look at these notes," he said, showing me photocopies of pages from Ezra's notebook. He's documented Spencer's after-school routine, identified times when the boy might be alone or with minimal supervision, and written what appears to be justifications for reclaiming what's mine. The next morning's restraining order hearing became something much more significant. With 2 violations already on record and evidence of premeditation, the judge issued a 5-year restraining order with enhanced penalties for any future violations. More importantly, Ezra was charged with felony stalking, burglary for being on our property uninvited, and attempted kidnapping based on the notebook contents. His bail was revoked, and he was remanded to custody pending trial. The attempted kidnapping charge might not stick, David warned me afterward, but combined with everything else, he's looking at serious prison time. 6 months later, Ezra pled guilty to stalking, burglary, and harassment charges in exchange for a 4-year prison sentence and permanent relinquishment of any claim to parental rights regarding Spencer. The attempted kidnapping charge was dropped as part of the plea agreement, but frankly, 4 years felt appropriate for the terror he'd put our family through. The most satisfying part came during the sentencing hearing, when the judge addressed Ezra directly. "Mr. Blake, your behavior demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of family, parenthood, and legal rights. The child you claim to want a relationship with was never your biological son, and your actions have traumatized him and disrupted the stability of his actual family. Your obsession has cost you your job, your freedom, and any possibility of the relationship you claimed to want." Today, 2 years later, Spencer is thriving. He's 11 now, playing travel baseball and earning straight A's. He occasionally asks about the confused man who wanted to pretend to be my dad, but mostly he's focused on being a kid with two parents who love him unconditionally. Gran and I celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary last month, and Spencer surprised us by presenting us with a handmade card that read, "Thank you for choosing to be my family," as if we'd had any choice in loving that remarkable kid. As for Ezra, he has 2 more years left on his sentence. I hope he uses that time to reflect on the difference between entitled demands and earned relationships, between biological connection and actual family. But honestly, I don't think about him much anymore. Some people learn from their mistakes and grow into better versions of themselves. Others spend their lives blaming everyone else for the consequences of their own choices. The last I heard, Cassie was living with her mother and working at a retail job after her own divorce was finalized. Apparently, her husband hadn't appreciated her public campaign to support Ezra during his legal troubles. She sent one final email to an old account I'd forgotten to close, asking if I felt responsible for destroying 2 people who just wanted to be happy. I never responded. Some questions answer themselves.